Hi, welcome. My name is Angelique, and today I'm going to be talking about Mercury in Sagittarius as it relates to astrology. So, if you have this placement or you're just a curious mind of astrology, you can listen and maybe this will help to just further understand this placement as it relates to interest and communication style. If it's your first time listening, I am a student of astrology for over 30 years. I have a background in psychology, mental health, and counseling, so I love to dive deep. I love to explore the mind, our patterns, unconscious patterns, how we relate to one another, career, and you can do all of that through astrology. So it's not just prediction, it's a great tool to learn about yourself and it can be really helpful for having a more balanced life and a life that is emotionally fulfilling. So, Mercury in Sagittarius. What I'm going to do is talk about Sagittarius, the mythology a little bit, and the symbolism, and tie it all together and make it more practical and see what we can learn from it, especially if you have this placement. So, Sagittarius is ruled by the planet Jupiter, and there's a Roman god of the same name, Jupiter, and he was a very expansive world leader that dealt with borders and customs, very expansive, but also a philosophical leader. And I talk more about how this mythology came to be for Sagittarius in my episode Sun in Sagittarius, if you want to learn a little more about that. But overall, Jupiter here is going to what they call being a detriment because Sagittarius is about big ideals, global, cross cultural, very either philosophical or existential things that are very intangible and go far and wide. And Mercury, and we'll talk a little more about that, is all about more like details and clear thinking, clear communication, which is very practical and small. And Jupiter wants to expand, it wants to be big. It's the biggest planet, and Mercury is the smallest planet. So it can be kind of challenging. So, thinking of Jupiter and interest, it's going to be interested in things that are bigger, expansive, and aren't really confined or more small. So this is going to relate more to ideas, but also it can be people, it can be hobbies, anything that you're talking about day to day. So the communication that you have with another person, if you have Jupiter energy here, especially Sagittarius, you might really more like the philosophical conversations, the ones where maybe we're just talking about the meaning of life, we're talking about religion, we're talking about symbolism and mythology. um, but you might really get bored or stressed out or just feel overwhelmed when there's so much practical thinking, all these task little tasks that you have to switch back and forth through, a lot of planning, a lot of organizing, things that keep you small. Jupiter energy wants to expand. So even down to the communication style, it's going to be big and expansive and might not be based in logic, might not be based in reality, or someone might not think through everything they're saying because they just want to talk more broadly or share information and talk in a way that is different than how they grew up culturally. So it's going to depend, but that's kind of a snapshot of the interest in communication style. We're going to have this really big, expansive energy, which can be tricky in this placement with Mercury because Mercury does not like to be too diffuse. It doesn't want to be so intangible or so impractical. But unfortunately, that's where this Jupiter energy thrives. Sagittarius thrives in things that are on a bigger, lofty, global scale and not as practical necessarily. It might really more so enjoy that. So there's big dreams, there's discussions that might go on for hours, and there's not a clear goal, and it's not a back and forth necessarily. So these are going to be your preachers, your professors. These are going to be the higher education teachers where there's more lectures. The people with this placement and Jupiter energy in general tend to really like that. Like, how can we explore an idea or a topic that doesn't have a black or white? The black or white thinking can be kind of difficult for this energy because it puts them in a box. It wants to expand. It can live in the gray area, which can be tricky if you are trying to teach someone a skill or get a thought across that maybe needs to revolve around planning or organization or something on a smaller scale. That is where it can be difficult to communicate with people more often. But the symbolism here, we have Sagittarius, which is a fire energy, and Mercury is air. And like I've said before in other podcasts, Mercury also has Earth complement, but that's more of the planning, organizing component. This talk is more about communication and interest and ideas, which are typically associated with air. So when you are blowing fire, you're blowing air on fire, two things can happen. This can make the fire go wildly out of control, leading to destruction, or a more direct targeted air can snuff it out, like blowing out a candle. So when we have Mercury in Sagittarius, we have these ideas that either might not fully get off the ground, and that can be because there's not really a practicality there, or really taking time and patience to think it through. Or we have ideas that are held on to so fiercely, that energy here, that fire, that fierce energy, that it can destroy relationships, it can be destructive to other people, because fire, this energy is about its own passions, and that can be a more selfish energy, especially when it's combined with air, because air is going to want to move through things seamlessly. There's a lot of flexibility with air. There's a different open quality. Whereas fire, while it can be wild, it's going to destroy while it expands sometimes. So this placement, the way someone talks or communicates with other people can be destructive, because they might talk to people in a more blunt manner, a way direct manner, and this placement can be difficult if someone is trying to network or trying to flirt or try to do anything under the radar. That phrase comes to mind, you get more flies with honey. That is not always the case with someone with Mercury and Sagittarius. They might not sweeten the pot or wait and see or observant, which can be beneficial for them if they're going to do something like law or philosophy, or something where they're an advisor or a counselor, or like I said, a lecturer or a teacher, something where these ideas need to come through passionately, and we need to be very direct and help other people in some way. But on a smaller scale, something like dating, something like trying to teach really young children, or just interacting with coworkers or people day to day, this can be challenging because that very blunt, direct, passionate, bold energy, it can hurt people's feelings, especially if it's young children or people that are maybe a little more sensitive, a little more emotionally vulnerable. So that is where we see that this can be a detriment, is that it can impede communication severely depending on what's going on. And this is, of course, just one snapshot in a whole chart. and everybody's different, so it's going to come up in some ways. But generally, this can make day-to-day communication difficult. The other part that makes it more difficult is a fire doesn't want to be contained. So having to talk in a very measured, strict, confined way, or only being able to communicate one specific way that's maybe small-minded or not very expansive or philosophical, that can be really hard for someone with this placement. And so if you have to give that information, it can just bring up a lot of confusion for other people. So I think of an example of you need to tell a technician something that's wrong with your home so to fix it. But if you have Mercury and Sagittarius, if you are in a space where maybe you're kind of going off on a tangent and you're talking about this other stuff that happened in the home and it's kind of all over the place, but you never really get directly to the point, that technician can be, it can make it more confusing that they might not understand. And so you might, Mercury and Sagittarius, you might get people that are asking you questions a lot more, asking you to repeat things, asking you to give more details. So this can be frustrating for a lot of people involved. But like I said, big picture thinking is going to be a sweet spot for people with this placement. So they like to talk broad and philosophical. So they love things that are maybe more fun or lighthearted. So communication that is either broad or funny is going to be what they enjoy most and how they enjoy communicating people with most. Other people that are maybe overly serious or they're very closed-minded about information or jobs, or they're just not generally curious people at all, can be difficult for them to connect with. Also, people that are very detailed and fine, especially like fine detail, and are maybe more critical or nitpicky, especially when it comes to communication, planning, day-to-day routines, that can be something of a big detriment and impediment in other relationships. So we see people who have these placements are really good in job positions where they're a leader or in a position of power or just anything which relies on their personal thoughts and opinions. So this could also just be really good at being a comedian, anything involving law, podcasting, or just preaching, anything, singers, writers, especially if you're like, you're having to write in a way that you are not beholden by a certain structure. So I think of like a songwriter, but even more so, someone who maybe is writing more sci-fi or fantasy because they are not beholden by the structure or what a story is supposed to be. And so that relates to their interests as well. People with Mercury and Sagittarius might be more interested in those elements, sci-fi or fantasy, or anything that is very unique or bold or interesting or just expansive. So the things they like to talk about, the information they like to share might have a sci-fi or a fantastical element, a philosophical element, religion, spirituality, fables, mythology. They might be really interested in learning and talking about that. This can also relate to just anything funny, like I said before, so they might really enjoy consuming media that makes them laugh. They might be very good at making other people laugh and enjoy being in the presence of people where there can be a lively, gregarious focus. So they can be the wise and sage elder. This is a placement in the birth chart that can really see more benefit the older they get. The later the signs are, the better they are in older age, just because there's not much you get when you Mercury and Sagittarius when you're younger. younger person, you don't have as much experience. So it just kind of comes out as maybe rambunctious, hard to sit still, distracted, and then getting older, having a lot more life experiences and finding things, then it can kind of settle into this groove where you're just this person that has a lot of stories and lore, and you're able to share that with people, which is why an advisor or a counselor or anything that requires positivity or you maintaining a positive attitude could be a profession that works well for you. And on closer relationships can be more tricky because more detail sometimes is needed for a closer relationship. So, for example, raising a child or living with a romantic partner, there's going to be more talks that need to happen about day to day, about routine, about structure. And this can feel kind of heavy and kind of boring. So it can be more challenging. And that is where we can get people with displacement that might put themselves more into their work. But if you have this placement and you can find freedom in your day, something that you can really expand and imagine, have big ideas or philosophical discussions, or just traveling, exploring, anything that you can do in your day-to-day might be interested to kind of keep you a little grounded or just not as bored and bogged down by day-to-day details, if that makes sense. So okay, thank you so much for listening. If you have this placement, you can leave a comment. It would be great to hear how this shows up for you. But otherwise, thank you again for listening and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.